As we know, in the year 2020, humanity is probably experiencing one of the greatest crises it has ever experienced in recent history. And I'm, of course, referring to COVID-19. There are now 44 million, almost 44 million people have been affected by it. Over 1 million people have died. But even more damagingly, the global economy has suffered, and once again, global poverty is rising. So, the first question we need, therefore, to ask ourselves is, what is the big message that COVID-19 is sending to humanity? And here, actually, there's absolutely no doubt about what is the big metaphysical message that COVID-19 is sending to us. It is making it clear that all of humanity now live together in one small endangered planet. And I sometimes explain this, I use a simple boat analogy from my book, The Great Convergence, which has also been published in China. And in that book, I say that in the past, when humanity lived in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living in 193 separate boats with captains or crews to take care of each boat and rules to make sure the boats didn't collide. And that was the 1945 rules-based order. But today, as a result of the world having shrunk, the 7.7 billion people in the world no longer live in 193 separate boats. The 7.7 billion people now live in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. But the problem with our global boat is that you have captains and crews taking care of each cabin, but no captain or crew taking care of the global boat as a whole. And in some ways, this explains how global crises like COVID-19 break out, how global warming has become a challenge. So we live, in a sense, in a captainless planet Earth. So what is the obvious solution? The obvious solution, therefore, is for humanity to come together to strengthen the institutions of global governance, especially the institutions of global governance that were set up after World War II by the United States and the Western allies. And they were all centered on the United Nations and other institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. But one of the greatest paradoxes about the times that we live in is that even though these institutions of global governance were set up by the West, and these are essentially Western in spirit, all these institutions of global governance, sadly, the West has been weakening and undermining these institutions of global governance. And of course, this claim can be disputed by some people. So let me give some concrete evidence of this. Now, clearly, one lesson we learned from COVID-19 is that the world needs a stronger World Health Organization. That's what we should be doing. But guess what have we been doing to the World Health Organization? In the 1970s, 62% of the funding for the World Health Organization came from mandatory, compulsory funding. So the World Health Organization could rely on 62% for reliable long-term funding. Over time, the Western countries worked together to push down the mandatory funding from 62% to 18%, less than 20%. How can you create a strong organization on the basis of compulsory funding that's less than 20%? And if you have any doubts of this, Professor Kelly Lee has written a book on the World Health Organization that documents all this. And of course, more recently, very sadly, President Trump decided to withdraw from the World Health Organization after COVID-19 broke out. And that was really a very sad, because what the world needs is for the US to work together with the rest of the world to strengthen these institutions of global governance. So my big message today, therefore, is a simple one. Let us not, to use again a very famous Western expression, let us not waste the crisis. Let us not waste the COVID-19 crisis. Let us use it to think very hard about how we can create a better future for humanity. And clearly, with all the evidence coming in that the destinies of all 7.7 billion people are now intertwined and we all live together in the same boat, the big message that is being sent to us, we should now work together to strengthen the institutions of global governance rather than weaken them. And so, to use the World Health Organization as a clear and simple example, the obvious thing we can do is to now reverse the pattern of funding for the World Health Organization, and instead of only giving them less than 20% of mandatory funding, raise it to 60 to 70 to 80%. And why is that important? Because with that way, the World Health Organization can then make long-term plans, recruit long-term health inspectors, recruit long-term scientific expertise, so the world is better prepared if something else like COVID-19 comes about. But the tragedy here is that the Western countries who created these institutions still have not come to realize that this is the obvious solution that humanity can and should take today. But this is where I hope that perhaps China can provide a good positive example. I mean, the whole world has noticed that China actually stepped up its funding of the World Health Organization after COVID-19 broke out. The whole world has noticed that China has agreed to share its vaccine with the rest of the world. And this is not just in the area of COVID-19, in other areas of global challenges like global warming. President Xi Jinping has announced that China's goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2060. So with all these examples, positive examples that China is setting, one more thing that China could do is provide the leadership to try and strengthen many of the institutions of global governance and to try and persuade the rest of the world that we should increase the share of mandatory funding for many of these organizations, not just the World Health Organizations, but organizations like the International Atomic Energy Agency. I know that well because I actually serve as a member of the Commission of Eminent Persons that was set up to review the future of the IAEA. So at the end of the day, I believe that all of us in humanity should understand the clear metaphysical message that COVID-19 is sending to us. And so humanity should now focus on non-traditional security threats like COVID-19, like global warming, and work together to overcome them. And with that, please let me wish this conference a great success. Thank you.